Hello, welcome to Size of Thoughts, Conversations with the Alliance of History graduate students. My name is Jacob Glicklick, I'm the producer of the show. River West Radio is in no way liable for the things that you will hear over the next hour. All opinions and quotations are solely those of Size of Thoughts, guests, and callers. So for tonight, as the 2012 election goes into its final death rattle, and decided to bring in sort of just as a range of views to discuss discuss the meaning of this, if any, that casting vote has. So for that context, I'm a doctoral student at UW Milwaukee. My viewpoint is going to be that individuals need to break with the electoral system and break with lesser of two evil types of voting, and recognize, I think, the damage done by Obama presidency through policies, through the structures that enabled policies, and also the damage that we as citizens do by giving sanction and support and endorsing the continual right-wing drift of the country, which I think has seen happen over the last 4 years. So joining with me for guest tonight is returning guest and actually co-founder Randy Miller, who also composed the music of Size of Thoughts that heard just a few minutes ago. So Randy.
Well, thanks, Jacob. I think this is my fourth time on the show. Glad to be back. I'm starting to think I'm like the Alec Baldwin of the show. Right? That was my joke. My position is a pretty, I think, middle-of-the-road position. I'm a big fan of the president. I think that I think we need the system. I think the system is certainly broken, but eliminating it, getting rid of it, or trying to bypass it, I don't think helps in any way. I guess the way I look at change in societies, I think it requires basically two things. It requires it requires a legal mechanism, a legal system, so that laws can change, and it also, along with that, requires change of opinions, change of hearts and minds, and they really go together. And for example, the first French Revolution, the Jews were emancipated, but yet 100 years later there was the Dreyfus Affair. So public opinion, laws need to go hand in hand, and again, it requires a legal mechanism. It also requires a mechanism of speech, being able to speak, to affect discourse, affect dialogue, getting ideas into the general public, so that there can be a change of consciousness. There can be an evolving of where the country goes. I think we have those things. They need to be constantly worked on. They need to be preserved, but we have the means to do that. And I think it can be healthy, and I think in general it's healthy. I hope to suggest a few things that I think would make them even better. And but I think it's a decent system. I look at politics in the big picture and in the long term. I think things are broken, but they're not broken because we're departing from perfection. They're broken because we're still evolving out of political misery. We're better than we were 100 years ago, way better than we were 200 years ago. Compared to 300 years ago, we are living in a utopia. Things still need to get better, but as long as we have those mechanisms that we can protect, I think we'll be okay. And I think Obama is done very good, very well. So that, I guess, we'll go with that.
Thank you. And for the third guest, first-time guest to Size of Thoughts, but regular contributor to River West Radio through Breaking Down the News, Caitlin Redding.
Good evening, Jacob. It's nice to be here. I want to add to a couple of things that Randy said. I think Randy has a wonderfully optimistic view. I'm not so optimistic. Historically, I believe you're correct in the things that you're saying. We really don't have a lot of experience voting as a human race, and certainly not in the United States. Voting really has not been been something that has been widespread really for more than about 100 years, maybe 150 if you're really pushing it. Again, the Old Boys Club and, you know, the founding fathers kind of keeping things amongst themselves. So I agree with you that we have probably not experienced enough political misery to really hit rock bottom yet, but I think we're skirting on the edge of that very much so. My views tend to be conservative, and I think a lot of people are quite surprised by that. I think that because I have a long history, a familial history of activism and protest, people assume that I take liberal stance, and actually that's not true. I have a range of views, and I do embrace even some of the Republican thoughts of government. Less government is probably better. We can quote a lot of facts and figures tonight. I think that my feeling is that people don't really control the voting anymore. I have a very grim outlook in terms of the ability, as we're getting to electronic voting, that we have a greater ability to experience corruption. And one of my biggest fears is that the vote is being manipulated. And I think that some of the things that we experienced with the Bush-Gore election really brought some of that out of the closet into light to the general population for the first time. Certainly we have a history of political corruption. In Chicago is wonderful, the early 1900s there, but where we're going, I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah, I guess we read elements of some of those points, but I think that the problem with elections goes deeper than Bush-Gore, or deeper than the issues of the failures of voting machines that are already being recounted in this election. I mean, I think that the bigger problem is how we're constrained in the options that we have. That, I mean, I view that both major political parties share far too much in common than is healthy, ultimately. So that there are a large set of assumptions, including towards privatization, towards reckless plunder of the environment, towards militarization, towards war, towards erosion of civil liberties, that will happen regardless of who's elected president tonight, that will happen regardless of whatever other internal fluctuations among both political parties. And what seems the danger from, the view from the left is that, a lot of the things that Obama did, if it had been done under a Republican administration, there would have been more people condemning it, there would have been more liberals taking issue with it, whether in terms of the further push towards test-based education and reduction of actual sort of funding and availability for schools, or the Libyan War, or military aid for Honduras, or National Defense Authorization Act. There's a long laundry list of things that could take an issue, which have been, I think, ignored to a greater extent, or if mentioned, as Washington Post does, they briefly, when endorsing Obama last week, briefly mentioned drones as the reason that some people might be legitimately upset, but then continued on to say, but it's still so much better than the alternative. And I think that kind of thing is dangerous. It teaches us to be bad citizens. It teaches us to be politically passive. It teaches us to be to put up with and give sanction to things we regard as evil, that are objectively intolerable, that are objectively to the right of Richard Nixon, and furthermore, by putting the focus on electoral change, it encourages us to be passive and non-politically engaged for the other 364 days out of the year, and to forfeit more interesting and productive actions that could actually achieve gains.
Yeah, I think there's a perspective that you can take where you can say there really isn't that much of a difference philosophically, and that's true. But that is a view, I think, that you're taking sort of from the lofty heights of philosophy. And I would say that for me, I would want to, and I guess to follow through with that, with that statement, come a little bit closer and look at what's possible, what's probable, and look at some of the things that I value as someone to the left of center, and then I think that you would agree with me. One of the things that I think is I'm sure we all agree with, is the the constant spreading of human dignity and freedom. This is something that we want extended. We want legal protection for all people, all, whether they're rich or poor, where they come from, who they are. I think if you get close enough, when you look very closely, the symbolic and literal and legal content of the Obama administration is much better than what you would get under McCain, Palin, or Romney, Ryan.
Disagree on that. I mean, I think that while there's certain symbolic gains, most of them are, I think, empty symbols or the wrong case of symbols. And for the shift, the things that could impact it and do is positive, such as, in terms of coming out for LGBT rights more essentially. No, but my point is that there's also a rightward drift, and things such as drone strikes, doesn't speak that become accepted and endorsed or tolerated at a much greater.
But let's stick with this notion of human rights, because this is central. This is something we all agree on. It's what. Again, there needs to be two mechanisms. One, that a discourse is affected, and two, that the legal part of is affected. Very recently, within a week, I saw President Obama. Here's someone running for re-election who could lose, talking about the dignity of gays and lesbians, talking openly about gay marriage. He repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He did a number of things. Repealing of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, equal pay for women, increased federal employment for individuals with disabilities, presidential memorandum extending benefits to same-sex partners of federal employees, memorandum protecting gay and lesbian partners, visitation, healthcare decision rights, Ryan White, HIV. Yeah. These are positive changes that promote human dignity, and I think we would agree with them all. And I don't think that the type of discourse and the type of legal change would occur under an administration, not just Republican, but the kind of Republican administration that is pulled rightward by what seems to be a very recent creation of a fringe element.
I think both of you have very good points. However, I think, though, that the bigger issue here is, let's think about this for a minute. Who is this man working for? This guy that we are led to believe that we're voting for, and I have some doubt about that. I just wonder, who does he answer to? Because as Jacob stated, it really doesn't matter so much which side is in, because a lot of the same things are going on. And he eloquently stated some of the things that probably were let go, that kind of slipped under the radar. Had they been affected by a Republican, might have gotten more discourse. And I agree. And that's the basis to what I'm saying. And that is really, is the president honestly working for us as a population anymore? I don't believe he is. I think with the way they want to do the electoral reform, the way they want to get Diebold involved with the electronic vote casting, where they claim they can't generate receipts for votes, the way they want to track things, and all of the manipulation that they use, which advertise agencies have been discovering and using for decades now. They're using all of these tactics to basically manipulate people as a population to get a reaction. And ultimately, I think that they're capable now at this stage of the game to alter results if they don't get the response they want from the population. So who is this man really working for?
Yeah, and I agree with you with those problems. And what I would say is we have solutions to make sure that we're restoring democracy to a greater degree of health. There are lots of things that are broken. The fact that both parties have come together and decided who gets to be in the debates, so that discourse is controlled only by the two parties. All we need to do is make lower requirements, allow for maybe a 0.5% popularity to get into debates. You would change discourse. Runoff voting will allow people to easily vote for third, fourth, fifth parties while not worrying about losing their vote. These things would help toward getting at what you're saying.
Yes, but ultimately, if our votes are going to be able to be manipulated, disregarded, and changed, it doesn't really matter in the long run or the outcome, because someone else obviously is going to manipulate who wins.
And, well, I guess I'd take even greater level of cynicism with that. I mean, I think will avert voter suppression and voter manipulation that occurs, which more frequently done by Republicans than Democrats, certainly of it. But, I mean, the greater level of manipulation that's not even as clandestine, that's legal, that's official, that's above ground, is to constrain what kinds of questions are asked, what kinds of discussions that can be happen. So I guess I probably would disagree with you, Randy. The notion that we're only a few minor tweaks away from having a more fully functioning, vibrant democracy. I think that the mechanisms of that are vastly more constrained, and that's probably what I think. Any voting in this process is. You don't think we have the recourse to find out when there is tampering, when there is abuse, and sue and fix?
No, I don't. I really don't.
Yeah, this is where we definitely disagree.
Because look at what happened to the people that were just trying to get recall petitions signed. Look at how they were physically harassed. Look at how they were repressed, how they tried to intimidate people by publishing names. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have some way of validating that somebody's not signing a petition 9 times or Santa Claus isn't signing on. However, I think that it leaves you wide open to be intimidated, and I know that I refrain from signing public documents because I want to be able to express my view, but I also want to be safe in doing it, and I don't feel safe.
And I think part of the question of trust gets to your notion of human rights and human dignity. Certainly agree that should be end result, but I would disagree that we can trust as a neutral, strong, legalistic system to advance and expand that. I think that.
You don't think minorities are better off now than they were 100 years ago?
Yes, I think they are, but it's not because of the popular vote,
and not because of internal processes done.
Not necessarily the popular vote, but because of the legal mechanisms, because of the change of heart, because of activism,
because of good works people have done.
Yes,
absolutely.
That's what the key is.
And that's the opposite of change through electoral process. It's external pressure, it's disruptive pressure that's done that eventually translates into certain legal gains. But I think all those are also
right. But both things need to be there. You need to have that change of heart, and you need to have the legal recourse.
But that's
and this
so
is
minority,
what
though.
this is what occurs with voting, with representation. Laws are passed.
I disagree, because I think what you need is the mobilization, is groups of people having power, exercising power, seizing power, wielding power.
And how do you institute then freedom?
In the sense of how do you institutionalize or ensure that afterwards, what will be the firm guarantee, once the protests stop, once the strikes or the threat of strike action stops, what ensures that people's rights are secured? Nothing. I don't think you can rely on legal gains or shifts in constitution or shifts in representation.
So an ACLU lawyer being able to take certain discrimination cases to court and have them passed and have them win and have the law come out in favor of this and have it changed, you don't think that works? You don't think that takes place?
I don't think it's a.
It's such a minority. It's so unoften that happens.
You don't really.
So few things actually come to fruition with that.
And I think more fundamentally, it's a those gains are still tenuous. I mean, nothing that's had in the Constitution, nothing that's framed of it is
Civil Rights Act.
Nothing's written in stone. It's a matter. I mean, I think that the economic gains of the Civil Rights Act were largely ended in Reagan's first term of office. That there was the right managed a successful counter pressure to demonize. I mean,
if that's the case, the laws are still there, and we still have recourse to the legal system, and we still have activists, and we still have all those elements.
My contention, and to reshape this a bit more towards actual election and process in the past 4 years, is that when state power and I think, Goldman Sachs, among others, in terms of that real disproportionate influence within state power, in terms of they can make new laws that undermine fundamental guarantees. I mean, National Defense Authorization Act, the fact that the president now has ability to detain American citizens without trial or due process, the fact that the American presidency now has the ability to have personal kill list of American citizens without oversight or due process. I mean, that's something that's happened.
Exactly.
And the fact that can be imposed even under an administration that's posing as sort of the more liberal, or as the turn away from the Bush administration.
And again, we're not departing from some ideal or perfection. We're still working this out. We have a long way to go, but the mechanisms are there. Even though laws can be circumvented and laws can be changed and they can be abused, we have access to get them changed. I don't understand how without that recourse, without that legal system, anything could be protected.
Because partly I dispute your assumption that that gains are being sort of made continually, that there is sufficient progress or establishment. I mean, just to have run in tangible ways that arguably there is less force held by law, less autonomy, less freedom by
Might we have a caller? That'd be great.
Caller.
Potentially. Chirp, I didn't hear it. If it goes again, I'll try to bring it up for it.
Jacob is making a good point in that, yes, you're right, Randy, there are gains being made, and absolutely no, I would not want these people to disappear, but the backlog of work for them at this point is so overwhelming, it would probably take 50 to 100 years to straighten things out. The Homeland Security Act and all of the things that followed have stripped us of so much of our Bill of Civil Rights, and it isn't, the problem isn't that we don't have recourse. I think the bigger problem is the ignorance. I don't think the majority of the population out there even has any idea to the extent their privacy is being invaded and the extent that they no longer have the rights that they were taught in school that they had.
And I think part of the problem with that, the issue with, within the discourse or within the silence, is thinking too much in terms of the electoral change as the primary, or for many people even the only way that we can imagine fighting back, the only way that we can imagine. Breaking that down even, what we encourage is the strongest element. Your vote is the best weapon you have, the best tool, the best political thing of it is to empower other people to make decisions for us, to select among what I think almost everyone in the country would regard as a flawed candidate, either way they're voting for, but that they see as the less flawed candidate that can be trusted or hoped for, to make positive shift. And I think that runs against, the issue of, facts on the ground, the actual policies that have been implemented and the structures that have been driving them. You, I guess, mentioned before the thought that the criticism of electoral change is overly philosophical, but I think it's rooted in a lot of tangible day-to-day things which are happening, and that if we aren't willing to, face the possibility that both choices might be sufficiently monstrous that we should not in good conscience support either. That otherwise we're constrained in even what we see, the things that aren't talked about as much. Now,
the one thing that we seem to all agree on is that it's broken. To the degree of which it's broken, we disagree on. Now, since these mechanisms are broken, my position, of course, is we do have recourse. Let's get them fixed. Let's continue the activism. Let's continue publishing. Let's continue changing hearts and minds. Let's continue getting progressively minded people in there to help change laws. What do you feel is the best way to get out of this mess?
You know, we cover a lot of stories with what I do with Michael Wordsworth on breaking down the news. One of our main things is to educate people. So on that point, you and I are probably step. It starts by educating people. It starts by letting them know what is going on. But even more importantly, you have to give people some sense of action and some sense of hope. And consequently, one of the things that I try to bring to the program is simple day-to-day steps that you can take to affect your change. And one of the things, of course, that we talk about is voting with your dollars. Don't buy products from companies you don't support. Mm-hmm. Don't contribute to political campaigns you don't believe in. My fear is that the corporate interest is so much larger and so much more powerful, even as us as a mass population, that are we actually battling the political parties, or are we battling corporations at this point? And I think we really lost it. I was just devastated to see that they've changed the law on lobbying. And just recently, I think within even Obama's term, I think the House did this, where they opened up, they took the restrictions off. Well, that's,
Right. Now we agree on this. We agree with the critique that terrible things, the Marxists were right. Eventually the corporations will rule. They will take over. They will have undue influence on the government. We know that. Now, how do we change that? If not through the courts, because we can't dismantle the state.
Well, I would disagree with that assumption. That's another. I mean, perhaps partly a discussion for another time. But I mean, if it's changing it through the courts, you're not actually talking about fighting that battle. Ultimately, you're talking about selecting people who will, in terms of be trusted to have the sufficient judgment to fight that battle for you, or in this case with courts specifically. Often, I mean, if we're talking like from the Supreme Court or overturning Citizens United, in terms of selecting the people who will then select who will appoint and then who will then ratify the people. I mean, that's I think that's a very passive and a very disempowering process.
How would you do it?
I mean, if the ultimate goal is to change consciousness in people, then I would say, try everything. I mean, I would say.
Well, that's not an answer.
No. Well, you want more particular answer. Yes. Yeah. I mean, informational picketing, picketing of it, disruption of right-wing movements and extremists of it. I mean, identifying the organizations that are most sponsoring the rightward drift from country and are most benefiting from it, calling them out of it. So therefore, independent media, heckling, civil disobedience, sabotage, reclaiming public space.
How do you empower people and organizations to do anything about it?
Oh well,
try a lot of things and see what works. I mean, that fundamentally, I think it's. I mean, it sounds sort of an invasion, but I think it's a matter of being pragmatic in terms of what people as individuals or as small clusters of individuals or as groups or as larger movements are in a position to do. But I guess the fundamental thing that I'd say is it has to be, rooted in disruption of business as usual to make an impact. If you're playing along with the normal rules of the game, if you're following the operations of institutions and status quo, you're usually limiting yourself in terms of how much you can actually reach people and make the case that this is a urgent necessity.
So there's a corporation that's clearly overstepping its bounds in all areas, and it's abusing private property. It's affecting the government toward its own benefit. It's getting away from paying taxes. It's manipulating people into buying their products. How do you stop that?
You're talking about Monsanto.
I'm talking about lots and lots
of but Monsanto was the largest one in the forefront.
How do you change that?
I would say that depends on people that, in principle, all options on the table, any means necessary. Figure out how many people are in the sort of core group, what they can do, how many other people could reach that you could reasonably expect to support it, in terms of, so in that context, boycotting them, or sabotaging their industry and their products they're actually making in a way to disrupt. Let's finish for a moment. In a way to stop to immediately. That's something that doesn't take a large amount of people to impact on, and can in itself, of course, get arrested and sent away with it, and the production resumes. But if it draws enough attention and the corporation is monstrous enough that is the most effective way to bring people's awareness of it, it might be a justified tactic. But partly what I think might likely to say of it, or like the reason why I see this as somewhat mutually exclusive with electoral system, is that the kind of argument is like, well, but if some people are doing that kind of things, like Earth First is blocking traffic and attempting to, in terms of chaining themselves outside buildings of worst polluting companies. I mean, we might agree that these businesses are terrible, but doesn't that risk alienating people? Might that be seen as like too extreme? Wouldn't it be better to like work instead with MoveOn.org and get this sort of progressive people elected? And I would say like no, ultimately, and I think that's why I'm suspicious of voting even in a less evil sense of it, because it forecloses much more interesting and likely and much more productive opportunities that
I still don't see how you could stop a massively powerful corporation by what you just described if it's not encoded in the law, if you can't bring in the state to have the force to eliminate to stop what they're doing. And what you're also describing is damaging of other innocent people. Corporations have people that work in them. And to go out and just go after a corporation without concern for what's in the corporation, who works there, what's going on.
I'm not endorsing indiscriminate bomb throwing. Even in this context, talking about even sabotage, which I think becomes the most melodramatic in terms of case. And there's most cases where even what we see as militant direct action does not involve that, because you don't have the people to reliably do it safely, effectively, and profitably. But I'd say that you need to be willing to consider, what all the options are. Not all fights can be won. Not all businesses. It might not be possible to stop any one of it. But I think you have in essence a better chance with sort of tactics than you do playing in a field where, which is expected, where it's known, where it's a matter of ad buyouts.
I would say what you just described fits in perfectly with the electoral system, because you are shaping and adding to discourse and changing consciousness so that we can have the legal structure step in and force them to obey the law.
But you're doing it in a terrain which is very well, which favors business as usual to an extraordinary extent. Of course, politicians are not going to put in things that are going to crack down on the sponsors that got them elected and that will get them reelected. Of course,
should.
But structurally, people don't act against their own immediate interests or the interests of their friends and close allies of it, unless enormous pressure is put up against them. So the problem with electoral mechanisms is that you are placing the decision making and deferring responsibility and deferring. Direct action isn't just aimed at like persuading people or hoping that other leaders will arise that will make necessary changes. It's aimed at like, here and now, let's do this. That we'll do this action that will inform other people about this. We will do this action that we will ourselves boycott this business. That we ourselves will aim at delaying traffic into this. That we ourselves will aim at shutting down production at this plant. The problem with electoral process is that it plays in a field where money and advertising and lobbying weighs disproportionately.
The Civil Rights Act was a product of a mass movement of people who were changed by experience and discourse and activism, and the government responded with the Civil Rights Act, which has been not perfect, but an exceptional for this country and for minorities.
But they've taken so much of it away. I want to address 2 points, but Jacob, I don't want to get too far off the point of the conversation this evening. When I'm finished, I want to get a reaction from both of you how effective you thought the blocking of Wall Street was. I'm the 99%er, I think it was.
Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy, thank you. So as in terms of world broadcast protests, I want you both to comment on how effective that was. But I also want to let you know that there are groups out there, Randy, kind of taking a step in the direction that you're moving. There is a group out there, And I think with the onset of the internet, it has become a forum which we can probably start taking power back. There's a group called Anonymous, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with them or not, but they have, more than anything else, exposed government corruption and government tyranny over their people by bringing internet access into Egypt when the president at the time did a complete blackout of internet and phone communication. The Anonymous people got in there and got different ways for people to be able to communicate through Twitter, through Facebook, through the internet, and they were able to get footage out and expose what was going on, and that world pressure created enough pressure to cause the president to step down at that time and things to change. So I think that's the type of a movement that we need. That's the type of a movement that you're kind of needing in your ideas here. And I think that groups like that are going to be what we have now in the future. The internet, I'm not a big fan for a number of reasons, but I have to honestly accept the fact that it is very effective. We can get a lot of information out. These people can do a lot of things, and the way that the group is put together, it's brilliant. Someone described it like a flock of birds. Like, well, how do you know what they're going to do? Well, we don't, but take the example of a flock of birds. They're all flying together in a group, and then suddenly one turns direction and the whole flock turns. And that's how I think a lot of the groups that put political pressure on governments to reestablish human rights, I think that's where it's going to come from. But how do you think effective? How was Occupy Wall Street? Do you think that worked?
I think Occupy Wall Street movement had more impact, more positive impact on American political scene than anything else happened over the few years. I think there are some partial gains insofar as it raised more awareness of structural inequality. And that's the thing. The facts of it have been involved and undenied and uncensored in the United States for a long time, but they weren't politically relevant. They weren't things that people were talking about. Gathering a few thousand bodies in public space of it did cause there to be more awareness of that. I think that overall, there were, as I said, positive impact, but I think that ultimately the gains didn't go far enough, the tactics didn't go far enough, and it didn't counteract the other ways that country has continued to move to the right, so that I think we're better off currently than we would have been without any Occupy Wall Street movement. I do think it provided more notions for a vision of the public and the visions of the common and notions of solidarity and trust and activist commitment, but I think we're still in a problematic space, and if we are just trying to recreate the same things that Occupy Wall Street groups have been doing for the past 8 months, we're not achieving anything further. It needs to expand and build past that.
I think they're very effective, and I think they would be more effective if we had more options in the political arena, when we had more parties that were able to participate. Because what activism like this does is it makes people say, what's going on? And then these people say, well, we're protesting this, and we're angry about this, and we hate this idea that wealth is concentrating at the top, just like the Marxists said it would. We want a change. So then the people who are responsible for helping discourse along and questioning the government, that is the media, they're obligated, and they'll gladly do it. Ask everyone in power, what do you think about this? So these things get asked to our leaders. They get brought into discourse. Now, it's easy to knock them down or to ignore them because we do have this only a two-party system. But if someone like Obama or Romney had people to the left of them, to the right of them, coming from all different directions, they would have to take more stands on these things.
I think I disagree with the notion of how effectively, the notion of how much the president is lobbyable by the people en masse. I think really isn't, to a large extent. I think that probably the way I read Obama presidency isn't just that he was sort of someone that wanted to do kind of progressive things, or that got swamped or overwhelmed. But I think that before even inauguration, the advisors had surrounded himself with Rahm Emanuel, more specifically, ensured that would be following a I mean, described as center at best, more plausibly as a right-wing drift towards militarization, towards economic policy. I mean, towards education. I think that.
But this is my.
I mean, just the higher. If you're talking people who are powerful, that are surrounding themselves with power, I mean, if they're going to listen more to Wall Street and to corporate-backed think tanks than...
I'm speaking toward a better mechanism, but the mechanism is there and it can work that way. The problem is that it's broken, and those things need to be fixed. And this old expression that the perfect can't be the enemy of the good, doing away with this stuff, and I'm still not sure what we would replace it with.
Common sense.
Well,
really.
But give me comments.
But anyway,
I need more than that. I need more than a concept. Okay. I need, and can I change the direction of the?
Well, I guess the other thing I wanted to respond to, you raised the issue civil rights as a gain of it. I mean, I think that. I don't think that fulfills the argument I'm trying to make. I mean, partly because it was born about through, I mean, extraordinary agitation and extra legal pressure, and groups of it that were doing enormously confrontational and disruptive tactics. And in that situation, in that period of agitation, and that we now call the 60s, as a result, there were specific policies that were put in that changed things of it. That were some solid improvements in them, but I'd say that they were also constrained, that they did not do enough to meet the economic situation of African Americans as a whole of it, that it gave greater access to political rights, but ultimately they say that didn't go far enough in terms of being a positive day-to-day impact on most people, and that furthermore over the following 15 years with Nixon, and then even more centrally with Reagan, much of the further gains of that were rolled back by talking about policing urban space.
That's why we have to be vigilant. Again, the perfect can't be the enemy of the good. We're not going to get these perfect situations and these perfect solutions. It is about evolving. It is about having recourse to help change things. We can't just start over.
Yeah, no, I'm not. But you're constructing a straw man at that point. I mean, none of us have insisted on perfection, or have in terms of a notion of a sort of. I'm not defending a sort of fanatical purity. But my assessment is that where we're at now, in terms of with federal government policy, is more right wing than left wing of it. That is doing more damage than it is doing benefit. So that it is worth opposing.
What is your answer to institutionalized racism? What is your answer to this? How do we change this, if not for the mechanisms that we have?
Changing it partly, I mean, by confronting it, by not being reliant upon government policies or improvements to expect us to make people more progressive. I think that.
When someone discriminates against a minority, when someone says you can't marry that person that you love, how do you make sure that they can do that? They can live their life as free as they can get it. How do you do that?
Are you saying that we don't have enough civil rights in place? Are you saying that we don't have enough?
I'm saying without the mechanisms that we have, how do you assure that a minority can be equal under the law?
Look, I mean,
because what you're describing seems like such an abstraction to me. You want to dismantle some of this stuff, if not all of it.
I mean, if we're talking, the issues of I think it's a straw man to read anarchist sentiment as endorsing it. Therefore, let us instantly demolish everything at this point of it. And
you're not.
The focus should be on opposing and bringing opposition and bringing change and being a restriction of areas
Right.
where authority is.
And what I'm saying is that without the mechanism, that won't do anything.
I think I think still have an overly naive view on how effective the mechanisms are for most people. I mean,
I don't think it's naive.
Yeah, that's a little rough.
I don't think it's naive at all.
I mean, in the context of civil rights or the context of racial policy, I mean, again, I mean, the fact that Obama deported more undocumented immigrants than Bush did, by over 1.2 million people. That I mean, I think. Is that something that are factoring into the, I guess, cost-benefit analysis for government? I mean,
Of course that you figure that in. I don't like it. But this is the system we have, and until we can get it fixed or we can make it work better, this is what we have to work with. Dropping out of it's not going to change.
I don't think fixing it's going to help either. I think it has to do.
Well,
don't
then
fix
what?
What's in place, change what's there. Take this out and put something else in.
What is that something else?
Well, part of the problem is that what you're talking about is actually consists of two different issues. You're talking about how a minority could be protected under the law. The law may be in place, but what you're really talking about is changing the attitude and the behavior of the person
Yes.
who is oppressing that individual, and a law in place isn't going to stop that from happening. We have to have a different societal take on things. We have to view life differently in order for everybody to respect those laws and say, well, I've got to do this.
Right.
Because laws don't do it.
You need both of them to go together. But in the absence of a change of heart and consciousness, you have to have legal recourses. That's why we have attorneys.
I agree, and I think we do
need
have legal recourse, but I just don't think it's effective as a mass change. I don't think it's enough. And
So
it's not big enough.
I need to know what we're going to replace this with. What is the change going to be?
I think that's asking the wrong question of it. I think
Maybe taking power away.
I mean, partly the standpoint of where we're at now. I mean, what can we as individuals, attempt to do that will most effectively, in terms of reduce racism, that reduce inequality, reduce authoritarian domination of one group or another, reduce militarization, reduce war. I mean, all of that. But I mean, if we're focusing on the form of those, I mean, I think it's not even. I think putting too much emphasis on the selecting of representatives to make those decisions or to make those changes for us is a deferral of responsibility, and it becomes. Of course, you're positioning it as the best that's achievable within the world which we're living in. As is the more responsible, the most, in terms of necessary or like pragmatically justified. But I think probably it's dealing in practice with only like one terrain. I mean, even though you've mentioned activism, you've mentioned in terms of other components of it, but I mean, I think that in terms of prioritize like legitimate channels.
Can I bring up another example? Yeah. When Obama was elected, one of the reasons why I voted for him is because the economy was tanking, and the difference between Obama and the Republicans would be there's a fundamental difference in philosophy in how the government relates to the economy. We needed a government stimulus. We needed the government to act, to put a stop, and to help protect its workers. This is something that, in theory, would not have happened under the Republicans. Now, what would you have done, or what would you have hoped to done to stop this downward spiral of the economy? What would you see as the solution to that?
Stimulus money plus closing corporate loopholes plus increased taxation of it. I mean,
so the same thing. So we agree on that.
I think Obama did do the right thing, and statistically it's been shown because no one has inherited a debt like this since Bill Clinton, and both Bill Clinton and Obama were able to turn around 20 years of Republican rule. It's a difference in economic policy, and that's one of the fundamental differences between the parties. So I see that. That's not going to be...
I see stimulus as a comparative promise. I mean, I don't think it went...
All of that stuff... all of that institution is part of this system that you're saying we need to do away with or change, or I'm not sure.
Because
This is part of the system that saved the economy, that allowed for funds to go and help people while they're suffering.
These are party differences. These aren't system differences. These are party.
Yes, they're party differences, but I want to know. I need to know what. You're posing an alternative view here. I want to know how that alternative view what would they have done in this crisis?
We're talking about analysis of situation we're at in 2008 or in 2012. And I don't disagree that the stimulus money is an area where voting for Democrat for the more flawed system of it had immediate benefit to people's lives. That that aspect of it made sense. But my point.
Well, that's economic policy. That's not the whole system.
But the system is the same thing. It is a system of laws. It works through Congress.
But if we're talking the larger aspects of how legislative or executive policy governs, my point is that with regards to the economy, that's inadequate. That the larger the structure is based on what both Congress has done and what the president has done, based on who the advisors are grossly inadequate to fix. That inequality has risen substantially.
I'm still trying to figure out what you would put in place, what the government would look like if there was a government to deal with all these problems in the United States if we don't have the system we have now.
That becomes a larger, as I said, larger discussion. But the other point is, the question of how flawed the current system is. If we're just disagreeing on that, the question of is there a better alternative? Is there a other one that can front
I think there are.
Is even secondary. But part of the question is, is more positive change being done currently by what we have as the status quo, by the institutions in power, or not? Or
I want to know what are these new?
Other countries have other systems that work, and I understand what you're saying, and I'm disagreeing with you not to fix it, but I'm saying let's change it. And I'll give you a pretty good example. When we had the cryptosporidium problem here, the mayor at the time did not try to fix the equipment in place. He completely threw out the system we had, brought in a system that's been used in Europe for decades, or for a long time, and now we have the best quality water in the United States, but we are not using the traditional system every other city is using. We're using a system that we adopted from Europe, and he was greatly criticized for that at the time, but he actually did one of the best things he could possibly have done for the population here. So I think one of the things we need to do is learn from history and look to other social systems that work. Let's look at socialized medicine. Let's look at how it works in Canada. How does it work in Sweden?
Sure.
Okay, because there are people who are happy with what their governments are doing. Now, granted, there's big sacrifices. Like in Sweden, 60% of your income is taxed. So I get it. But new systems.
Socialized medicine is not by any means outside of the system that I'm saying we need to save.
But it's not the way our system works. Our system is a capitalistic-based system.
Right.
There's no room for equality.
We're arguing economic and political relationships of power. This is at the heart of what we're arguing here, and I'm asking, how do we negotiate those?
And do you believe that with representatives that we have and representatives that will have or could have it, that socialized medicine or welfare state is something that is achievable, that it is pragmatic, that on your own terms, that elected officials are going to endorse, fight for?
Is it theoretically possible?
Not so even though theoretically. Again, in the terms of the institutions we have, the people we have, the political parties that we have, is that something that's possible to happen without drastic change in sentiment?
With the exact political parties we have, no. But remember, my position is not that what we have is the ideal. That with fundamental changes, we can expand discourse. We can expand what what can be done in this country. We can have socialized medicine if we want it. I mean, we can do that. It's going to require, again, expansion of political ideologies, all these different things. This idea, this whole right-wing thing that this Gramscian, cultural hegemony that makes socialism this terrible word, all that needs to be changed. But it's capable. We can do that within our system. We need to expand the system. We need to have more ideologies represented.
Okay. I think we're into closing statements.
I'll close my views here. I understand what you're saying, but I don't agree with you. I don't think that either of our political parties or the systems in place in the United States are in a place where they would be able to institute, and I'm not going to call it socialized medicine. I'll call it public, because you're right. We seem to have a real adversity to anything called social program. So let's call it public service or public medicine. But I have to go back to what I started with, and that is, I think most people feel powerless. I think they feel that their vote really doesn't count. I think they feel the system is corrupt. The results are, tabulating results are able to be manipulated, and I think it's reflected in public media.
Yeah, and I think that it's good to have a vision of expanding ideologies and expanding options, etc. But I think that if you're putting the tools to doing them through trust in institutions, through trust in elected officials, through trust in the Democratic Party, through the process of voting and occasional agitation, occasional activism as a supplement to that, that's, I think, a fundamentally backward way to approach it. I think that the flaws or the damage or the brokenness of the system goes deeper, and it needs much more extensive efforts to be changed. That it needs a fuller commitment by people, all people of it, to not defer the making of decisions or the wielding of power to others, but to act collectively and take such power collectively. And that's part of the reason why I think that argument for why elections make people think like as bad citizens ultimately, because it causes us to endorse and rationalize or find excuses, or even just find ways, even people who don't vote and are not politically active, run through it. Either way, provides things to look and to go along with what is a intolerable system. Yes.
There has been no more powerful a concept for human beings than that of natural human rights, and building systems around that as primary have been done wonderful for human freedom. Thank you.
No, I guess I don't know if I would disagree with that, because I think human rights that are reliant upon being given or being sanctified or being ratified by the police officer, by the legislator, by your elected officials are inadequate and frame as a surrender of your power. Thank you and good night.